Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the second JPEG Fake Media workshop. This workshop I organized by the names that you see here, all JPEG Standardization Committee members, Frederick Timmermans and Deepayan Bomik, who are the chair and co-chair of the ATOC group on JPEG Fake Media, and as well as Fernando Pereira, who is the requirement subgroup chair, and myself, I'm the convener of JPEG committee. Next slide, please. Um, just a reminder for those of you who might have missed the first JPEG Fake Media workshop, it has been all recorded, and in the URL that you see on the bottom of the page, you see how you can access it. Probably the easiest is to go also to jpeg.org and find your way out there. It's probably easier, but other than that, if you have an interest to immediately find it, this is the URL where you can find the proceedings and also access to the recording. This first workshop was very successful. We had three great speakers on three great topics, and that was followed by a session on questions and discussions. We decided to have three about 20 minutes presentations, have 40-50 minutes of question and discussion and an introduction in the beginning. But we try to keep it under 2 hours, and this is what we will try to do here too. Next, please. Yeah, now regarding JPEG Fake Media, since the chair of the activity is here, I would like to leave the floor to him.
Yeah, so my name is Frederick Timmermans. That already introduced, I'm the chair of the Fake Media initiative of the ad hoc group. And in the previous workshop, we had a longer introduction about the use cases and so on. We decided for this workshop not to repeat all of that. So if you want to see that long version, please go to the website and have a look at this previous workshop. For now, we just want to give a short update of the initiative and the current state. So first of all, the scope of the initiative. So the scope of JPEG Fake Media is the creation of a standard that can facilitate secure and reliable annotation of media asset generation and modifications. And the standard also support usage scenarios that are in good faith as well as those with malicious intent. So that's the scope as we have defined it in our white paper that you can also find on the website. And I think that there's two main issues to clarify a little bit in this scope. So first of all, we speak about generation and modifications. So that needs some additional explanation. And then secondly, we talk about good faith and malicious intent. So first of all, I made an overview of all the types of images that circulate, going from the raw output of a camera sensor, the camera raw, which is typically something which is only used for processing and for archiving. What we typically share on social media, for example, will be a processed version of that raw image, typically in JPEG, where some noise reduction has been applied and some basic processing, typically in camera. But on top of that, what we often do if we share images, then we want to improve them a little bit. So we might enhance the contrast or the colors a little bit, apply some sharpening, maybe crop them a little bit or straighten them, maybe transcode them from one file format to another one. And if these are not lossless, then there's also some modification there. Then in the next step, we can do more extensive modifications. So using software like Photoshop, for example, we can remove objects, we can add objects, we can change the shape of objects, or we can even compose the background of one image with the foreground of another image, and so on. So basically you can go really far with that. Then at another level, we have the deep fakes, which are based on existing content. So you have a movie, for example, that you transform in such a way that a person is telling something different than in the original version. And then finally, there's the step that we call generated. You can have content which is produced in, again, software like Photoshop, for example, but it's not modified, but it's created like a painting, but it's photorealistic. So it's made in such a way that it's hard to tell whether it's real or not. And it can be done by humans, but there again, we also have deep fakes. There's websites like This Person Does Not Exist, for example. It's a website where you can go and every time you visit it, it will create a new image of a face of a person that does not exist. So from the start till the end, we start from original content over modified content to generated content. There's not always a clear border between those versions, but they somehow indicate the severiness of original versus entirely generated. Now, for all of these types, there are different use cases, and some of them they are in good faith, and other ones are in malicious intent. So for the original content, for example, typically we share this content via social media. It's used in traditional media, in newspapers or online news websites. And photography is also an art, so they are also artistic creations. But at the same time, even with original content, you can frame a message. For example, since a photo is a 2D projection, you can play with the lens to make an object appear bigger or appear smaller, for example. Or you can stage, you can make a photo of a landscape in a studio, or you can use a picture which is made in one in one scenario and use it in another context, and as such also spread a false message. Then with the modified content, there again, this can be used for creative content production. I think For All Mankind is a TV show which uses a lot of deep fakes to tell a storyline in an alternate history. But there's also algorithms to restore old media or to enhance it, to colorize black and white images, or to increase the resolution, for example. So there's a lot of use cases with good faith where modified content, including deep fakes, are used. Of course, all of these modifications can also be used with bad intent for manipulation, spreading fake news, for insurance fraud, impostering, and so on. And then finally, with the generated content, there again, it can be useful to use a face of a person that does not exist for privacy reasons, for example, but also for the special effects. Sometimes you don't want to risk the life of an actor, but you can generate something artificially that still looks like it is real. And then again, on the malicious side, there again, spread of fake news, identity fraud, and so on. So there's a lot of potential misuses of generated content as well. And all of this summarizes a little bit the use cases that we have. And the reason why I think it's important to stress this is to make very clear that although the name of the initiative is fake media, it's not only about the malicious intent use cases, but it's about the whole picture, both the good faith as malicious intent use cases that we're targeting. So in general, if we talk about fake media in context of this initiative, what we mean is fake media is the result of any image or video, any media modification that changes the content or the context, regardless of the intentions. So what are the aim and the objectives? So first of all, the aim of the workshop, for example, is to understand all of the applications, all the scenarios, the use cases, so to interact with the community and stakeholders to clearly align these use cases which are related with fake media as previously defined. And then based on these use cases, we identify requirements. And in the end, the aim is the creation of a standard with the aim to ensure interoperability between a various range of applications. And then in the end, looking at the requirements, there's two main categories. There's one category related to the description of the modifications, and the other group of requirements is related to linking these descriptions, linking these annotations in a secure way to the content so that you cannot strip them off in an easy way, for example. And if you break that down, so related to the description, it's about all these clauses that I've previously introduced, adding a label to the content to describe whether it was modified over time to keep track of the provenance of these assets. Then there's additional information that you might want to signal, like the purpose of the modification. If it's not annotated from the start, and it's detected by an algorithm or even by a human, what is the likelihood of a modification? What's the region where a modification has been identified? And then basically it's the whole provenance, the whole life history of an image that we want to attach to the media asset itself, to keep track of the history and of all the modifications that have been made over time. Related to the secure signaling of authenticity information. So in the end, we might want to restrict access to that metadata. Identify if the metadata or the associated content has been modified. In addition to provenance information, there's also IPR information that we might want to include and securely attach to the image. Identification of the source, where does an image come from? If you have composed images, which are all the different sources that were used to create that composed assets. And then verification of the integrity of media assets. So this is still quite broad requirements that we have identified so far, but this will be extended based on the use cases, and in later stage also be further defined to lead to more technical details that then will be in the end standardized or become part of a specification. I'm going to go back to Turaj to give a quick overview of this of the process that we're following, and then conclude the introduction.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. We have actually defined and implemented to a number of initiatives similar to the JPEG fake media, a process in order to start issuing call for proposal. Here you see the different steps of it. For interest of, I'm not going to go through them, but a lot of things that we do have as aim the engagement and information, and this is one of the reasons we have organized this workshop, is to gather as much as possible use cases and requirements of fake media applications. Look at what relevant industry and governmental initiatives are in this area. There are a few, and we have identified some, but probably there are some others we haven't yet. Engage again with stakeholders, and this is, in this case, in form of organization of the workshops. Next. So if you are asking yourself how you can contribute, obviously by being here, you are already doing it. We hope you can spread the word around you and encourage further participation. Please help us if you have any special use cases to identify and understand them better. And always it is helpful when it is in written form. And obviously through these use cases, then we have to identify and understand what are the requirements. And if you could, for use cases and requirement, provide us with some text, etc., so that we can put in our document, it would be fantastic. Next. So here I would like just to thank again the organizers of the second workshop. Their names I already mentioned. If you have any interest in this and you have missed, there is a mailing list. You can subscribe. Anybody can subscribe and contribute to it. It's open. You can subscribe via the URL that is given below there, and more information can be found from the jpeg.org website in a subsection called JPEG Fake Media. That it's quite easy to find if you go just to jpeg.org. Next. So let's go back now to the program of our second workshop on fake media. We just finished the first welcome and introduction. I would like, without any further delay, to leave the floor to Sabrina Caldwell from Australian National University, who is going to tell us about credible images, human perspective and perceptions.
Hello, nice to meet you all. Thank you very much, Turaj, and also thank you, Frederick, for allowing me this opportunity to speak with everybody. I will go ahead and share my screen, and if you can just confirm that you can see it and that you can hear me, that would be really nice. Can you see that screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what you're looking at there is a photograph of an art installation that took place at the Foam Amsterdam in 2011. This was a collection of photographs by Eric Kessels, who printed out all the photographs that had been uploaded to Flickr in a 24-hour period. And they were just drifts in several rooms in the art gallery. Gives you some idea of what quite a lot of photographs look like. Now that was just 1 million photographs. Oh, I shouldn't say just 1 million photographs, that's quite a lot. But that was what that is one of the rooms of that. Now, moving on to today, we have a lot more photographs being uploaded every day. Let me introduce myself very swiftly because I don't want to take up everybody's valuable time. But I am a dual citizen of Australia and the United States. I was born here, grew up there, and met my Australian husband here in California, which is why I currently live, teach, and research in Australia at the Australian National University. I got interested in fake media when I was doing my first PhD in the College of Arts and Social Sciences, and I became concerned about the future of photographs in light of the easy image manipulation that had begun to be promulgated throughout everywhere, really. And so I decided that the best way to tackle that particular issue, because it's such a difficult one, is to do another PhD. And I did that at ANU as well in the College of Engineering and Computer Science. So before I talk a little bit about some of the investigations that I've done, I don't have time to do this properly and have a Socrative poll, etc., so that you can all provide your answers. But please do have a look for a few moments at these photographs, and then I'll just quickly walk through whether or not these photographs are real or fake. Okay, that should be enough time. So this first one here up at the top is not a real photograph. The Ford company doctored the photographs of a Shelby 1000 car to show that as it was taking off, it actually lifted up off of the ground, something I'm pretty sure all of us would prefer not to have our cars do. And the numbers here indicate the most recent time that I ran this experiment with some students, about 80 or so of them. And it goes to show that when they were looking at it, 42 of them thought that this was a real photograph and 46 of them thought that it was not. The next one, Brooksia micra, I'm going to talk about a little bit later, so I won't spend too much time on it. But yes, that is a real chameleon, and that is its real size. It's the tiniest, that is a juvenile, but it's the tiniest chameleon on the planet. And as you can see, again, it's really not too much better than chance. This one is true, scary, but true. It's a great white shark following a kayaker. And again, not particularly good accuracy on the part of first-year university students trying to figure out whether that's a real photograph or not. This one is photo art by Eric Johansson from Sweden. Again, not a great outcome in terms of accuracy. And last but not least is Krzywy Domek, which is a house in Poland, and that is in fact a real house. And this in Polish, I understand, means crooked house. Interestingly, the students did much better with this one. Every year, we have about 160 million cameras produced. I understand just recently that started to reduce in size, but we still have well over 1 billion cameras out there. And every day, about 4 billion images are uploaded to the internet via just Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr. Obviously, there's lots of ways in which people can change their images, editing software, or even just using a modern digital camera with filters. There's many ways of capturing and processing photographs that require manipulation for us to learn new knowledge. Space photography and electron microscopy come immediately to mind. So there's a couple of photographs, one on immense scale and one on microscopic scale. We would not be able to see these things without special processing with photographs. And I think this is probably a really good moment for me to say to you that I really enjoy photo art, and I think that there's a lot of great uses for things like deepfake and GAN photographs in art media and film and television. So I'm not against manipulated images at all, and I agree with the ad hoc working group approach to fake media as being something that has many aspects to it, of which only some relate to misuse of imagery. And manipulating images is fun as well, but they also have an important role to play in society as memorializing events in our lives and providing a photographic record of history over time. Some people use photos to influence our opinions and feelings and thoughts. This can be a real problem for us to deal with and can create a lot of controversy and conflict in society. These are some of the examples of ones that have happened recently. I'm just looking for my note to say that just before Christmas, we actually had an interesting situation here in Australia where Zhao Lijian from the Defense Ministry in China issued a photograph of an Australian soldier apparently murdering a child. And I apologize for saying that. I certainly wouldn't put the photograph on these slides. It was an extreme problem for us. We were quite outraged. America was also outraged on our behalf. The defense minister insisted it was a real photograph for several days and then eventually admitted that it was a local artist who had created that photograph. So there's many, and I also want to just point out this photograph here. This was probably the photograph that sparked my interest in this issue when I saw that if people manipulate photographs and these are taken to be real photographs, it can cause life and death consequences. And I became quite interested from that point forward. A senior person from the National Library of Australia and I were talking not too long ago, and she said that in the GLAM discipline, GLAM being galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, the current times, this decade, the previous decade, and even some of the 90s are viewed as the digital dark ages because people don't really know what they're looking at. And they don't know if it's a representative photograph or it's a generated photograph or if it's somewhere in between. And of course, as we have been mentioning, there is the issue of fabricating images using generative adversarial networks and deep fakes where we may have unaware lay people in society who will be fooled, and even aware lay people in society being fooled by the kinds of videos that can be created at the moment. And that, of course, is only going to become more sophisticated and popular within society. Now, over the time that I've been researching this, when I first started, it was well before knowledge credibility became a problem, before post-truth and fake news became the word of the year for high-profile dictionaries. And I had lots of people who would talk to me about the reasons why image credibility is not important. And ultimately, I boiled them down to three basic arguments. One of them is that photos have always been manipulated. And I'm showing you here an example of something from 1869, which was one of the first composite images. That was made with 5 photographs, and Henry Peach Robinson stated that this was the case. This isn't an assumption or a later analysis. He announced that at a photographic conference. So yes, photographs have always been manipulated, but I think all of us can agree that they aren't being manipulated now in the same way that they were even in the 20th century up until the very end of it, because you needed to have specialized equipment and special talents and skills with developing enlargers, etc. So it's a different world in terms of manipulating photographs. The second argument is people choose what they're going to take a photograph of. And so a photograph is subjective from the moment that the photographer frames it. And that is very true. However, still, it is a representation of a real scene, even if what is in the scene has been selected by the photographer. And the last one, my favorite one, is, come on, Sabrina, what is reality anyway? And if you let them, people will argue you right down to the notion of all matter being made out of molecules and forces. And I think we all have to agree that we live in a certain plane of reality. And so that argument doesn't really fly with me anymore. There's not a lot of ways in which we can tell of a manipulated photograph. So for example, in the case of this photograph, you'd look at it and you kind of go, well, I wonder if it's manipulated or not. There is one technique that possibly everybody here knows about, and that's that even though humans intuitively don't pay attention to shadows, we discard them because they're not highly important in our day-to-day life. Shadows can be very important in identifying whether a photograph has been changed. In this case, as you can see, this photograph has been taken and composited together from at least 3 different images, possibly 4. I did talk to this person here is the photographer and the photo editor, and I spoke with him via email, and he confirmed that it was 3, but I still question whether or not that was a couple. So in my research, I looked at human perspectives and human perceptions. Now, we've already talked about, in human perspectives, we've already talked about the 3 arguments that I mentioned just a moment ago. And we also sort of touched on accuracy in human perceptions when I was going through those initial photographs where we were determining whether or not they had been changed or not. So moving on into the perspectives that we haven't covered, I have done this experiment with a number of groups, which is basically to take 10 different photo editing techniques and give them an A3 piece of paper with this ribbon printed on it that says science on one end and art on another. Actually, before I talk about these results, I should mention that one of the reasons that I go with this binary of science and art is because it is the very argument that's been raging about photography since the day photography was invented. And Susan Sontag in 1977 had quite a lot to say about it. She basically came down on the side that it was science, but also talked about how it was art as well. I believe it's a nature versus nurture style argument. Both of them are appropriate to talk about. So I gave them a piece of paper and a bunch of tags, and I said, on this ribbon from between science and art, let me know where you think these various techniques have impact on an image, which ones basically are most impactful in moving a photograph that's a reflection of the light bouncing off of an item in the reality, in the landscape, and moving towards the idea of that photograph being art. And these are just a couple of examples of what they looked like after the students, these are postgraduate students, had worked with them. Ultimately, I had 135 results, and these are the different places where these different kinds of techniques landed in terms of the mean of the answers. I think it's worthwhile noting, however, the standard deviation, which is extraordinarily large, because the students had very varying ideas about this. In particular, photo montage basically spanned most of the ribbon. But if you have a look from going from this direction to that direction, it kind of makes sense. There's a few things that I perhaps wouldn't agree with, but it gives an idea of how people perceive, the perspective people have on photo editing techniques in respect of how they manipulate an image, an original image. Another thing that I did is a snap survey from respondents saying, you know, how easy is it for you to tell if a digital photograph has been manipulated? And again, I want to just mention that this particular thing I did in 2017 before the knowledge credibility crisis began to loom. But even at that time, people would say, no, it's pretty difficult for me to tell. I somewhat care about digital manipulation, and that's really quite in line with the kinds of attitudes that I found at that time, which was people really weren't caring about it yet. They hadn't quite recognized there was an issue. How much do you think it matters in society if many digital photographs are manipulated? That was also over out of 10, a 6.58. On the Likert scale, it was significant. And they were somewhat concerned that there was no authentication process. So that is what I wanted to say around perspectives. What about perceptions? Can people see manipulations in photographs? So I did an experiment, and at this point I would like to acknowledge my professor, Tom Gedian, who has been guiding me on my journey and is a close colleague now as we work on physiological signal recognition and a number of other things. We focus, when we look at an image, we look at salient features, and we are particularly drawn to looking at bright areas of photographs. But can we tell if they're manipulated? I did an experiment looking at eye gaze, how a person looked at a photograph. What you're looking at there is a heat map of eye gaze looking at a photograph. The photograph is a little bit busy. The one on the left-hand side is John Howard, who is a former Prime Minister of Australia when he was opening the Australian National Museum. And I inserted the photograph of the Queen on a light board behind him as a manipulation to see if people could see that. And one of the findings that I discovered is that, not surprisingly, intuitively you'd expect this, the longer a person looks at a photograph, the more likely they are to be able to spot a manipulation. And if you have a look at the red spaces here where this manipulation was added, people look at faces as well, so that's a bit of a confounding factor. But as you can see, the people who said that the image was manipulated looked at the photograph here for much longer than the people who said it wasn't. Another element that comes into it is logic and uncertainty. This is the photograph you saw earlier of the Brooksia micra chameleon. And it was really interesting how people used logic to determine whether or not a photograph was manipulated. In this case, the kinds of arguments were, there aren't any lizards that small. One of my favorites, the lizard couldn't have been on the match when it burnt, or it would have been killed. Matches aren't black. So this is a cultural thing in that some people don't realize that matches can be produced with black match heads and not just red ones. This is good logic. You can see I've given them the green tick, that you can see that the girl in the front is not smiling and the lighting is wrong. So that was good logic applied. This one was very entertaining. This is a picture of a cow on a car that was issued by the Surrey police in England to remind people to look for animals before they take off in their cars. And it's a cold place, there's snow on the ground, so people use logic to say, well, the car must have been warm and the cow wanted to get up on the hood to keep warm. And the logic, one of the logic points was, I'm from a farm and I know how much a cow weighs. So he knew that there was no chance that that was actually a true photograph. And I did have one woman who said that in Russia that they can train cattle to do that. And these are the percentages of logic used out loud. Mind you, this is only verbal out loud logic. No doubt there's quite a lot more happening mentally. And uncertainty is the other thing. Even based on their various decisions, they all were uncertain of whether or not these were real photographs or not. And just a couple more things to say before I close, and that is, in perceptions of manipulated photographs, one of the things that I did that was really interesting and actually sparked quite a lot of streams of research within the human-centered computing group is noticing that while people had a difficult time identifying this photograph is known to be faked in that this missile here did not actually fire. In fact, yes, this is what actually happened. This missile never launched. Only 11 out of the 70 people that did this experiment were able to identify the cloned missile, even after being told that one of them had been cloned. However, using a classification supervised neural network, I was able to accurately discern from the eye gaze patterns of the subjects, which was the correct wrong missile. That is to say that they looked at the wrong missile quite a lot, and it was discernible for the neural network, even though they didn't say which one it was and identify it correctly. Their eye gaze told them which one it was, and that was why it spawned a lot of research, because we determined that you can find out a lot from people's physiological signals that don't make it to conscious decision making. So, can we tell if an image is real? Well, if 100% is accuracy and confidence, the yellow area is how confident people are that they're correct, which demonstrates that by and large, in my experiment anyway, they were only ever 80% confident that they were right. And the green area is accuracy. So you can see that even though they weren't at 100% confident, they were still more confident than they were right. So that gives us a pretty good idea that people cannot tell when they're looking at manipulated photographs. So this is a really big problem. Who's trying to solve it? These are all the different kinds of groups that are attempting to solve the problem and come up with ways to address it. And as you can see, the JPEG stake in fake media is front and center in all of this. I've been very pleased to be able to be participating in this process. And the Content Authenticity Initiative is something that we have heard about in the first workshop, and that's really interesting initiative as well. There's also Witness, see it, film it, change it. And I think that Creative Commons has a role to play in all of this as well. I've been engaging with Creative Commons as well. Is metadata the answer? Partially. I won't go over that because Frederick did that earlier. But what I will say is that this is a very thorny problem. It's very difficult. We aren't going to come up with silver bullets for this. We're going to have to come up with lots of different approaches. Complexity, we have to be able to understand that this is a complex problem. We have to understand what information we do have and what information we need and ways that we can get that information. We have to understand other people's perspectives on these issues. We have to understand whether or not we have any biases in respect of the way that we think about this issue. And we also have to think about what we can and can't do with the technology that is available to hand. And that's all that I had to present today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sabrina. That was a very interesting contribution. I guess there will be definitely some questions and points for discussion, but as said in the beginning, we'll keep these till after the other presentations. So our next presentation is from Luisa Verdoliva, also known as Annalisa, from the University Federico II of Naples. And her presentation is on deep fake detection, state of the art and future directions. So Annalisa, over
Hello,
to you.
hi. Good afternoon to everybody, probably good morning for some of you. And I'm very glad to be here and to give this presentation. Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, Taraji, for inviting me. I am actually a professor at university, and I actually study multimedia forensics since around 10, 11 years. So starting with the first manipulations using Photoshop. And in the last 3 years, I continue to work on classical manipulation, but also looked at deepfakes. So in this presentation, I'm going to present you the most, which is actually the state of the art now in deepfake detection, and what I believe in my experience are the major challenges about this topic. Okay, so first of all, I mean, why is detection possible? I mean, there are several clues one can look at. It was very interesting in the presentation before this, thanks Sabrina for that, to show how humans react to images, and if they are able to understand if an image was manipulated or not. Of course, also Frederick highlighted that manipulations can be local in an image, but also the image can be completely generated. In this case, you can see some local manipulations in videos and fully generated images. Of course, I mean, I will show to you some visual inconsistencies, but there are also hidden artifacts that are that can be exploited in order to detect a possible manipulation. Okay, first deepfake images, first GAN-generated images, first deepfake videos sometimes has some anomalies. Here I showed you some color anomalies, some artifacts that actually come up in the process of generation. There can be also some semantic inconsistencies, for example, lack of symmetry, colors of different eyes, or maybe a girl can have just one earrings, or ears can be not perfectly symmetric. I have to say that all this type of inconsistencies, I mean, if you look at the very recent GAN-generated images, they actually disappeared. So, I mean, probably this type of inconsistencies are sometimes in some images, but will be very soon not present anymore. There are this other type of inconsistencies, which is indeed related to the identity. I mean, it's true, I mean, there are a lot of deepfakes. It is not really easy to perfectly match the way a person moves his or her head, or is actually the biometric trait of a person. Also, there are, as I said, some hidden artifacts, some traces that are related in particular to the generation process of a generative adversarial network, and that can be properly extracted from the image. I will show to you this concept of artificial fingerprints that can also be highlighted in the frequency domain. There are recent works that try to highlight this artifact, which is actually related to the upsampling process present in a generative adversarial network. And you can see these strong peaks in the Fourier spectrum of the image. What we did a couple of years ago actually was to apply a procedure which was very much similar to what one can do when you want to extract photoresponse photoresponse non-noise uniformity, which is actually a sort of fingerprint of the image, and it can be extracted in order to make identification of a specific device. We did a similar thing. We thought, okay, we can think that now the generator of a synthetic image acts as a sort of embed a sort of signal which is specific of the generation process. And so we collected a certain number of GAN images, and through a denoising process, we extract what is called typically a noise residual, made an average, and then consider this sort of fingerprint of the generation process. And if we have then a test image, we repeat the same processing and then evaluate just a normalized cross correlation in order to understand if the extracted fingerprint is matches or not with the ones of the synthetic image. This was quite an effective procedure if compared with the same fingerprint that we can extract from a real image. And in fact, actually, we noticed that this type of fingerprints were even different for two different architectures, different if the data set was also different. And here you can see that it is estimated using a growing number of residuals, and it actually is a sort of quasi-periodical behavior. And if we compare if we evaluate the correlations between fingerprints coming from different generators, then actually they are quite well separated. And this same concept is also present in a camera. I mean, in a camera, of course, we have a lot of in-camera processing, and all this in-camera processing also characterize a specific type of image. And what we can extract from an image is, of course, different from what we can extract from a synthetic image. And if we make a modification in an image, we are actually modifying some of the, which is the history actually of the image. So whenever we make a modification, there is a modification also on some of the, for example, even in compression, if we make a modification and then we compress the image again, we are modifying, we are compressing again the image. So some area of the image will be compressed twice and some area just once. And so, of course, we can do a sort of approach which try to highlight these traces by extracting a camera fingerprint from the image and then detecting these anomalies. I think that here you can see this fingerprint and also notice the typical JPEG artifact of the image, while on the face there was an anomaly, so something different, for which maybe you can tell maybe it was a manipulation. And for what concerns the specific deepfake detection, most of the techniques right now are based on supervised learning. So they actually are trained on very large data sets of pristine and fake videos. And they try to learn both visible and not visible artifacts. There are many, many methods that are based on different types of architectures. Incredibly deep pre-trained deep networks, even on a different application like object classification, work also really well for forensics. Of course, you can, in a video, you can also exploit the temporal direction, and you can work in the spatial domain or in the frequency domain. I mean, there are a lot of possible combinations. Some approaches try to extract specific failure or specific artifacts. For example, you can look at the landmark locations in a face. As I told you, there are sometimes visual artifacts or physiological signals like the heart variations in a video. And I mean, there are many of these that are in a certain sense more explainable because they try to look at a specific artifact. Actually, explainability is a very important point in the detection process. And I mean, what we did 2 years ago was in collaboration with the research team headed by Matthias Nister in Munich. We created a very large data set of manipulated videos of facial manipulations using different methods. So we created this data set where we considered both face swapping and facial reenactment. So we have actually a face that is completely replaced, but also only changing the expression of a face. And then we made an analysis to understand to which extent we were able to detect these manipulations. And I mean, it was interesting because for the same video, we could have actually different manipulations. And all these videos came from, I mean, they were very different one from each other. And we could try to understand also the level of detection of different deep learning methods. In particular, we made an analysis in terms of accuracy, both on uncompressed videos, and you can see that results are very good for almost the methods on the different type of manipulations. Note in any case that during training, these manipulations are present. So you can see, I mean, the network can actually is trained on those examples, and then the network can also detect them. But if we compress data at different type of quality, so here we have low quality and high quality videos, so at a different compression level, then the artifacts that are present in the video actually reduces, and detection is not as effective with uncompressed data. So of course, compression can be a real problem for the detection, because compression reduces the level of information that is present in a video. You can still also detect YouTube on YouTube if a face was fake or not, but you need some fine tuning, and this because the pipeline of video compression coming from a camera is quite different when you upload a video on the internet. And this mismatch in terms of history of a video can be a real problem. In general, okay, here there is just another example, because this is a deep fake that was created this summer by the Center for Advanced Virtuality. Only the speech of President Nixon was completely changed. And here we made a sort of analysis to try to understand if we can also interpret the result, and if the network, we could point to the area that actually was really manipulated. Okay, there are a lot of deepfake datasets in the last period, and so we wanted to understand what we do, what happens if we train on a dataset and then test on another dataset. So what about generalization of deep learning based methods? Actually, that generalization is a problem. In fact, if we carry out a cross dataset analysis and we train on a dataset like on the face forensics and then test on the dataset proposed by Facebook, you can see that accuracy drops. And this also happens if we change the manipulation. So if we consider a facial manipulation related to the expression to a replacement of the face, so in this case, we have a very bad results. And so actually this cross dataset analysis showed that all these methods are really very effective if you have the examples in training. But if you have different type of manipulations or even a different pipeline of the data, then the performance can be very bad. And these are also some other results on GAN. So we actually consider here cycle GAN versus style GAN, so different type of GAN architectures. Again, performance drops. And here, of course, I mean, this also happens for image-to-image translation, so just changing the style of an image. So in a supervised setting, everything works well, but the main problem is generalization. And for generalization, there are several ways for which one can try to improve upon it. One, some of the most effective are augmentation or one-plus learning. So in augmentation, let's just talk a bit about this. So using augmentation, what you do is considering in the augmentation not only some standard operation that are included in the training process of a deep neural network, but also, for example, JPEG compression. So considering an image that is also compressed at different levels in order to increase the level of generalization and at the same time also of robustness of the method. And this here, I just want to show to you that how the compression process can reduce the traces. These peaks that you can see in the Fourier transform can be strongly reduced if compression increases. So if you upload images on the internet where compression and even resizing is normally done, I mean, these are not malicious, of course, operations, but they can reduce the strength of these traces. So this detection on unseen architectures, detection again is very high. And then it can still be high if you do a very strong augmentation in terms of area under the curve. Performance are a bit worse in terms of accuracy. And one of the main problems we noticed in our experiment is actually the threshold. I mean, one of the problems is that there is a very high sensitivity with respect to the threshold, because here you can see, for example, that to distinguish real images from cycle gun, you need a threshold which is different to if you want to distinguish with another gun architecture. So, I mean, it's quite important to set the threshold in the appropriate way, otherwise results can be really bad. And then just as the last thing I want to talk to you is this one-class learning. So what we can do is to extract information only from real images. And in order to avoid, I mean, all the supervised methods needs all this fake data. But if you have a new GAN architecture, if you have a new way of manipulate the image or the video, what can you do? So maybe one thing is, okay, I learn what is real. And then if I can see the fake data as an anomaly, then it's fine because I only need the real data. So what we did, we actually tried to extract this camera fingerprint from real images by training a famous network and extracting patches from a lot of different cameras and devices in order to maximize the distance between patches from different cameras and minimize the different distance between patches from the same camera. In this way, we also did a learning which also includes the JPEG history, because as I told you before, when you have an image and then you modify it, typically you have to compress it again. So actually, if two patches have two different quality factor, JPEG quality factor, then we think maybe there was a modification, there was a sort of modification inside the image. And so we also trained the network in this way, and we come out with this noise print. We proposed this a couple of years ago. I mean, we worked on this, and in this way, we extracted this information, and we do not need any type of information on the test image. I mean, this is actually independent on the specific camera used for this test image, because it was trained on a very large data set, around 600 different type of devices. And then we try to highlight the anomaly. And this process, as you can see here, when we extract this fingerprint, we are actually sometimes showing the specific artifact included in JPEG. And some interesting result came when we noticed that it was also possible to highlight different JPEG grid misalignment between the background and the object, or in this case, the person that was spliced inside the image. So here you can see that when we tried to extract the variations, we were able to highlight perfectly the border, because there were actually a different type of JPEG grid. And we extended this to videos, so to deepfakes, and we trained on a lot of pristine videos from different cameras. And actually here you can see the noise print extracted on the frame of a video and the heat map, the corresponding heat map. It worked quite well only on the face for videos, because videos were a bit harder to train with respect to images. And we here it is quite evident, for example, on this video we found on YouTube, that on the face of the actor, there was something strange in terms of actually with respect to the background and even to the face of the child. And okay, here you can see there is a sort of mask applied on this face. Okay, of course, I mean, this is not behind the compression and also resizing that can reduce the information. You can also work in an adversarial scenario where you can insert some noise on the fake face, for example, or even on an image in order to make the network not work anymore. So I mean, this is an important. It is very important that whenever you have to develop a method, you also have to think about this, so about possible attacks. And indeed, actually, we worked also on this because, I mean, we needed to understand to which extent we could trust camera fingerprints. And so we tried, we took a GAN image and we inserted in this image the camera fingerprint. And then tried to understand if the detector was able to detect the image as synthetic or not. And this was a very interesting experiment because it showed actually all the vulnerability of the deep learning based approaches. Okay, so actually as a conclusions, I would like to say that, okay, technology is really advancing very fast. And I mean, I could really never expected the level of realism of this type of images and videos. As also Sabrina said, the point is that before it took so much time using a software editor to make a manipulation, while now it's really easy and it is also very much effective. Also, developing a reliable forensic detector is not an easy task. JPEG can help in the sense that, as I showed to you before, you can detect these variations in terms of JPEG read or the phenomenon of JPEG double compression, but at the same time, JPEG reduces these artifacts. So of course, I mean, it's a problem when an image is strongly compressed. And in general, successful solutions should take into account also this all non-malicious post-processing, should be a sort of transparent to this post-processing, should be able to generalize to new attacks, and also should take into account a skilled attacker that can insert some noise or make something to make the detector not work properly. As future directions, and this is also some of these topics actually are now we are working on them. One important thing is how to characterize the malicious intent. I mean, this is quite important because if you have the spreading of fake news, I mean, you should know what is a manipulation which was not malicious, and how indeed to characterize something that was made actually for a malicious intent. We need interpretable solutions. All these methods are based on deep learning, and it is quite hard to understand why they're working, why they are not working. Can we trust them? And I mean, all these tools are very effective in let's say, in ideal scenarios, in a scenario where you know that the manipulations are in training. Otherwise, the result, who knows? It's important to consider a different type of sources, so put together audio, video, images, and text. And of course, I mean, as also said before in the introduction, it is important not only to develop passive methods, which is what I presented to you now, but also consider active approaches. And okay, of course, I mean, we are in the JPEG workshop, so think at possible integration in the JPEG standard, and consider, for example, how JPEG could enhance the capability of a detection algorithm for deepfake detection, but in general for manipulation detection. As a final observation, I would like to say that in my experience, I believe, I mean, we have very effective methods for deepfakes, but we think they are not so as effective for the classic manipulations, because classic manipulations, you are, for example, making a composition of two images that are real. But in this case, for deepfakes, you make a composition of a real image and a synthetic one, and they have a quite different type of characteristics. So it's a bit easier in a certain sense to detect deepfakes with respect to the standard ones. I finished my presentation.
Thanks a lot, Annalisa, for the very interesting presentation. I think there's a lot of relevant information for us to work with. Even though detection itself is out of scope for our initiative, as you mentioned in the conclusions, there's still a lot of synergies between the detection and then the role of standardization. But before we move to the discussion, we are going to listen to our last speaker for today, Bruce McCormack from Neural Transform, who focuses on the impact of AI on news operations and also worked for the Canadian broadcast company CBC. So his presentation is entitled Truth, Trust and Technology, Synthetic Media and the Newsroom. So Bruce, please.
Thank you. I just want to see if I can get my screen on board and we'll be all set. Slideshow. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Frederick. I'm Bruce McCormack. I'm a consultant to the CBC, or Radio Canada, which is the public broadcaster in Canada, and I'm the former head of technology strategy. And I'm describing some work here called Project Origin, which is a project that we started when I was working at the CBC, and I'm continuing to act as co-lead on the project. Project Origin is a project that we're working on in collaboration with the BBC, the New York Times, Microsoft, and CBC Radio Canada. So what I want to talk about a little bit today is the implications of technology in the business of journalism. And a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, the science of synthetic media, is starting to have impacts on the core beliefs and operations of journalistic operations. We have a business that's been built for hundreds of years, or at least, in the case of BBC Radio Canada, about 80. The BBC is about 100. The New York Times is a lot older than that. But it's built on seeing is believing. And that's one of the fundamental roots that we build our business on in journalism. And when we start to think about what's happening now, that's coming under threat. Journalism has had news. If you go into a typical broadcast operation, there's two groups, and they're adjacent, but they don't really work with each other directly a lot. There's the journalists who are in the business of telling the truth as they see it, and there's technologists that build complex networks to carry that signal and to process that signal, and they're focused more on bandwidth and storage and power. And those groups, while they may have departments across the hall from each other, don't often have a lot to do with each other. What's happening now is with misinformation and disinformation, which is a technological attack on the business of journalism, there's need for those groups to start to engage with each other and try and find mutual solutions. And that's really where this project and Project Origin came out of. It was something I started worrying about when I was at CBC Radio Canada. I ran into some colleagues at BBC who had similar thoughts, and we started a project up. So I want to combine two threats. One is the synthetic media we just chatted about, but the other is the way we distribute our signals. In the past, if you at 6 p.m. went to your local newscast and saw your local news anchor say, "Hi," you recognize the face and he says, "This is the top stories of today." You knew a couple of things. You were probably talking to your local broadcaster. That really was the host, and that probably was the lead story for the day. We had end-to-end control of how the news left our facilities and arrived with our audiences. And that's just not the case anymore. People get their audiences through indirect paths. We send our signals out, but we lose control of them before they reach our audiences. So we now have an issue where the issue of trust is one of not just the journalistic standards, but also the distribution technology that takes that information to the audiences, and that collectively becomes the thing that consumers have to have trust in. So as I said, BBC, New York Times, and CBC, along with Microsoft, we're having this conversation at an event run through the Partnership on AI in London in the fall of 2019. And we had to start acting on this. We had similar concerns, and if we didn't start working now, this problem was going to overwhelm us because the solutions were going to take time to put in place, and technology is advancing very rapidly. So we kicked off Project Origin to work on that, focusing principally on video and focusing principally on the distribution from the publisher through to the audience. Now I'm going to preface this by saying synthetic media is not always a problem, and your introduction caught that. there's really good and valid uses for synthetic media. In the television business, digital sets are in widespread use where we make an artificial set with real people on the sets. There are synthetic news readers that are starting to come out. In the newspaper business, we use text generation to create stories on sports and stories on business where the patterns are very obvious and you can create patterns. You can see where this is going with digital best appearances, where you can eliminate the need for hair and makeup people and take your hosts and your anchors and get their best appearance once, and then use that on top of themselves. Basically, self-manipulation of the image to provide a better look and feel of the video. So there are valid reasons to do synthetic media. So it's not the technology that's good or bad; it's the intent. And intent to deceive is the thing we're really worried about, and it is a real fundamental issue in our business. Why is it fundamental? We have one product. We sell trust. The CBC, CBC Radio Canada, the public broadcaster in Canada, the BBC, the New York Times are in the trust business, and that's the core fundamentals that everything in the news business is based on. But what happens is trust can become eroded. You know, you see brands where fake values of those brands exist are starting to come through. Watches, handbags, there's a number of things where the value of the brand is eroded by the fact that you're not sure whether you're dealing with the reality or the real brand or something that's a synthetic image of that brand. We saw this video a couple of years ago and it really opened a few eyes. I'm just gonna play a couple of seconds of it for you. And this video is not a true CNN video. It's also not state of the art anymore. But what it did demonstrate is another level of threat we started to worry about. Not just what if the content that we're using has become fake and they're fooling our reporters, but what if the thing that gets faked is the reporters and the hosts themselves? What if you faked our anchors and faked our sets and therefore faked our identity and use that to give credibility to amplify disinformation? And it's take everything we've worked at to build trust and then use that trust against them. So you're believing invalid information because it comes from a semi-authoritative looking source. And that was the nuclear option that we started really, really worrying about. So it's very similar to existing technologies. There's digital rights management technologies that are out there that will prevent legitimate media from making it into an illegitimate source or into an illegitimate channel. But what we're really dealing with here is illegitimate media masquerading and getting into a legitimate channel and being consumed by audiences that do not know who they're talking to. So that black sheep has the potential to come in and fake reality, and it doesn't have to be believed for long to do serious damage. Think about the day before an election. Think about a CEO making an announcement that affects the stock price that people are trading. If you can create a short-term temporal disruption of the truth, you can seriously cause harm, and we're in the business of preventing harm, so that's something we've had to really worry about. You add on the work that you were just describing with deep fakes and the ability to replicate video, especially headshots. And if you think about the news content, we have anchors that are sitting at desks. They're stationary. They're not moving around. It's just a headshot. It's relatively simple to replace. It's the same with politicians who tend to stand at podiums and speak. So they're not actively running and moving around. They're very stationary, and it's really just the headshots that have to be worked through. That's falling within the realm of democratized technologies to do deep fake imagery. You put the two of them together, you don't know where it's coming from, and it could be manipulated. You end up with the threat that we're really worried about, which is the erosion of trust. So what are we doing about it? A couple of things. We've talked about detection. There was a couple of good presentations here on detection, but when we looked at detection, we came to a couple of conclusions. One, that it's a cat and mouse game, that the technologies will always advance, that and we're going to see the detection technology constantly being chased by the fake technology, the ability to create effects. Second, the volume effect. We operate in near real-time environments, and there's just not time often to do near real-time checks on this kind of material. And it's the state of the art right now doesn't handle volume. The deepfake detection challenge that Facebook and others worked through, when the data was placed or when the tools were placed with live data, it was rate's around 65%, which just on the volume we're dealing with just doesn't work. So how do we tell people? Well, we're in the business of saying trust us, and the message that you have to use with media education is be skeptical. So that you get into cognitive dissonance where you're asking people to both believe and not believe at the same time. There's a role for media education, but it's a tricky thread to get right. And that left us with provenance, or the ability to prove what was true. And while that is a long slog to get in place, it is technically possible. The just see where I'm at here. So as I said, we were taking a look at provenance as the way to go, as something we were going to try and work our way through. I also want to mention here that there's a difference between trust in media and truth. We're talking here about building a Tylenol safety seal that secures news as it's coming from its source, not the actual news itself. So again, how that was interpreted by audience is something we have to work our way through. There's no single solution to this. Provenance doesn't solve the entire problem that we're dealing with, but it does play a big part. It helps with the identity of the publisher, the non-alterability of the content, and a secure metadata package, which we can deliver to help people interpret further down the chain. So in terms of how does it work? Well, if you see something live, you believe it. But in the media delivery chain in the business we're in, there's a gap between the event and the audience, and that's filled with a series of actors that are manipulating or changing the image for good and valid reasons, and passing it along towards the audience. And each one of those is a potential point of intervention of both changes that are positive or negative and will need to be tracked and coordinated. That takes a coordinated approach from source to destination. We've written a paper about this to outline our events. If you go to originproject.info, you'll find the paper we presented at the International Broadcasting Convention in Amsterdam last fall. And it's something that takes you through the approach and the prototypes that we built in cooperation with Microsoft to this could be done. In essence, what we're doing is creating a separate validation path to go back and validate a piece of content so that we can check its integrity to make sure it matches what we're delivering. I used to be an audio engineer, and I know that noise is something you're presented with. You don't control the noise, you control the signal. So what we're doing here is effectively amplifying the signal rather than dealing with the noise. When I talk to journalists and that slide scares them, I show them make tall things stand out in a field of sheep is the same approach. So we're developing a number of publisher tools and consumption tools to try and build up this set of functions. The publisher tools, we're looking at confirming identities, establishing metadata patterns, fingerprinting the media so that we know what we've got, and then binding the media to the metadata so that we know it's non-alterable. For consumption tools, we need simple observational tools that we can show to audiences. We need them to be able to interrogate those if they want more data. And for people like journalists, there's forensic tools to dig deep to make sure that they understand what is true and what's not true. And there's an awful lot of work has to be done on labeling. A lot of the work that the Partnership on AI is doing is on media labeling, because how the labels are interpreted has a really big impact on what kind of information you're conveying to an audience. We're not doing this alone. We've quickly found that the people at Adobe and the Content Authenticity Initiative were working on very similar concepts. And Leonard presented at your first session. We've been started with video, moving towards photos. They started with photos, moving towards video. We said, hey, it's time to do this together. We endorsed their white paper. All of the Project Origin partners endorsed the Content Authenticity white paper. And collectively, we said we need to form some standards so that this is done once and done consistently across the industry. And about a month and a half ago, formed the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity to start building fundamental proposals for standards. So that brought in TruePic, Adobe, Twitter. We have ARM and Intel involved, along with Microsoft, New York Times, BBC, and CBC. So we're all working together to try and build a proposed standard. Origin will work on the journalistic requirements. C2PA will work on the technical standards, and we hope to have something out later this year. That's it for me.